Dad sacrifices my future for the golden child and refuses to pay for my tuition, but I get my ultimate revenge. My dad stomped all over my dreams just to protect his favorite son, refusing to pay a single dime for my education. But in the end, I got the last laugh. I am 32 years old, and I have a younger brother who is 28. We grew up with just our dad since our mom passed away when we were kids. From as far back as I can remember, my dad always played favorites, and I was never the one he favored. It was obvious, painfully so. He and my brother were two peas in a pod, both rough and tumble, obsessed with sports, and always trying to outdo each other in manly competitions. Meanwhile, I was nothing like them. I did not care about football, wrestling, or getting covered in mud. That just was not me. What I did love, though, was cooking. From the time I was a kid, I was always in the kitchen, watching my mom work her magic over the stove. I loved the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the way different spices could transform a dish, and the joy of making something with my own hands. My mom encouraged it. She always told me I had a gift. But my dad? He hated it. Said it was not manly and that I needed to toughen up. At first, he tried to push me into football, but I was terrible at it. Could not throw, could not catch, and sure as hell could not run fast enough to make a difference. Eventually, he gave up trying, and after that, it was like I was invisible to him. He had his perfect son, my brother, and that was all he needed. My mom was the only one who treated us equally. She never picked a favorite, and I adored her for that. But when she passed away from cancer while I was in 8th grade, everything fell apart. My dad and brother did not grieve the way I did. They bottled it up, pretended like nothing had changed, while I felt like I had lost the only person who truly saw me. The only thing that brought me any comfort was cooking. I spent all my free time in the kitchen, trying to recreate the dishes my mom used to make. I wanted to keep a part of her with me. But my dad? He could not stand it. He would storm into the kitchen and yell at me to get the hell out and go do something a real man would do. One day, after catching me baking, he snapped and said that if I wanted to spend all my time in the kitchen, I might as well do all the housework too. I lost it. I told him that he never loved me, that I had always been a disappointment to him, and instead of denying it, he just looked at me and said, "You are right." That was it. That was the last real conversation we ever had. After that, I gave up trying. I locked myself in my room, focused on perfecting my recipes, and avoided him and my brother as much as possible. It was clear that I was on my own. When it came time for college applications, I set my sights on culinary school. I applied to several, both in the country and abroad, hoping that one would take me in. I had already spent the summer secretly working at a restaurant, gaining experience, and securing a recommendation letter. When the acceptance letters came, one of them was from a top school in France. It was a dream come true. But there was one problem: I needed my dad to pay for it. I knew it would be a battle, but I was not prepared for what actually happened. When I told him, I expected him to laugh it off or call cooking a waste of time. Instead, he just looked at me and said, "I am not paying for your tuition." I was stunned. It was not about money, he had plenty of that. No, his reason was much worse. He refused to pay for my education because he did not want me to outshine my younger brother. My brother, who had been struggling in school, was barely holding it together, and if I went to France and made something of myself, it would make him feel bad about his failures. I could not believe what I was hearing. My own father was choosing my brother's ego over my future. I begged him. I told him that this was my dream, that I needed this. He did not care. He told me my brother's well-being was his priority, not mine. That was the moment I realized I meant nothing to him. After hours of fighting, I gave up. I packed a bag, walked out of his house, and never looked back. I moved in with my aunt, my mother's sister, and told her everything. She did not have much money, but she refused to let me give up. She pulled together what she could, asked her friends for help, and somehow, they made it happen. I went to France. I worked my ass off. I studied, I trained, I put in long hours at restaurants, and I made every single dollar they spent on me worth it. When I graduated, I was one of the best in my class. I landed a job at a prestigious French restaurant within months and started sending money back to my aunt to pay off what I owed. After a few years, I had saved enough to come back home and start my own business. I spent 2 years working as a head chef while planning every detail of my restaurant. Then, just a few weeks ago, my dream became a reality. My restaurant officially opened. 2 of my best friends from culinary school joined me as co-owners, and I got to name it after my mother. It felt like everything had finally come full circle. We had a private event to celebrate before opening to the public. I invited my aunt, her friends who had helped me, and a few close friends from school. But I did not invite my dad or my brother. They had never reached out to me after I left, so why should I bother? Turns out, I did not need to invite them, they showed up anyway. They arrived an hour early, claimed they were here to surprise me, and got past security because we shared the same last name. And just like that, after all these years, there they were, acting like nothing had ever happened. I was stunned. My dad and brother greeted me like long-lost family, smiling and laughing, telling me how proud they were of me. It felt surreal. The last time we spoke, my father had made it clear he did not give a damn about me. Now, suddenly, he wanted to act like he had been in my corner all along? I knew something was up. They handed me a gift, a framed portrait of my mother. My dad claimed he had commissioned it for me, that he had known right away the restaurant had to be mine when he heard about it. He told me he always knew I had potential. My brother chimed in, hyping me up, telling me how amazing I was. I waited. I knew there was more. Then, finally, they got to the real reason they were here. My brother, who had barely scraped by in school and was now working as a bartender, needed a new opportunity. My dad wanted me to make him a partner in my restaurant. A respectable position. I almost laughed in their faces. Instead, I kept a straight face and told them I would think about it. I had no intention of doing any such thing, but I wanted them to stay for the party. Because I had something much better planned for them. They thought they could walk back into my life and ride my success? They had no idea what was coming, I should have seen it coming. The moment I started making a name for myself, the moment I built something of my own, my dad and brother would show up like nothing had ever happened, looking to cash in on my success. And sure enough, that is exactly what they did. The night of the private event at my restaurant, they arrived an hour early, walking right past security by using our last name like some kind of golden ticket. They said they wanted to surprise me. That part, at least, was true. I was damn surprised to see them. They strolled in like they belonged there, all smiles and warm greetings, acting like the past had never happened. My dad, who had barely acknowledged my existence growing up, was suddenly proud of me. My brother, who never had a kind word to say about me before, was now my biggest fan. I stood there, frozen, trying to process the absolute audacity of it. My business partners caught on pretty quickly. They saw the way I stiffened when my dad clapped me on the shoulder and how I barely managed to mumble a greeting in return. Without a word, they gave my so-called family a polite nod and stepped away, leaving me alone with them. Before I even had a chance to gather my thoughts, they hit me with their little grand gesture, a framed portrait of my mother. My dad beamed as he handed it to me, saying he had it commissioned for my restaurant, claiming he knew right away that it had to be me when he heard about a new upscale place with my mother's name on it. Said he always knew I had potential. I almost laughed right there. My brother chimed in, patting me on the back, telling me how proud he was, how amazing it was to see me doing so well. It was surreal, hearing them say these things after years of treating me like an afterthought. But I knew better than to believe a single word of it. They were not here for me. They were here for what I had built. So, I waited. I let them talk. Let them butter me up with all their fake praise. And then, finally, they got to the real reason they were here. My brother, the golden child, the one my dad had sacrificed my future for, was struggling. He was working as a bartender, something he had only managed to get because my dad pulled some strings. His grades had been terrible in high school and college, and the football career my dad had been banking on never happened. No scholarships, no big future, just a guy pouring drinks at a club. And now, my dad wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to make my brother a partner in my restaurant. Not an employee, not a manager, no, a partner. A respectable position, as he put it. Something my brother could be proud of. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing in their faces. Instead, I played along. I nodded, pretended to consider it, told them I would think about it. Of course, I was never going to do it. But I wanted them to stay for the party. Because I had something much better planned. They seemed satisfied with my answer, smiling like they had already won. But they had no idea what was coming. As the guests started arriving, I made my rounds, greeting friends, shaking hands, making sure everyone was enjoying themselves. My dad and brother did the same, blending into the crowd, soaking up the attention, telling people how proud they were of me. I even overheard them bragging about me to a few guests, as if they had been in my corner all along. The nerve! Finally, it was time for the speeches. My business partners spoke first, sharing their excitement about the new venture. Then, it was my turn. I stepped up, raised my glass, and looked around the room. My father and brother stood near the front, grinning, completely oblivious to what was coming. I started with gratitude. Thanked my guests for coming. Thanked my aunt, who had believed in me when no one else did. Thanked the friends who had supported me through the hardest times. And then, I got to the part that really mattered. I told everyone about the sacrifices it took to get here. About how I had to take out loans just to afford culinary school. About how my aunt and her friends had scraped together the money to send me to France because my own father refused to pay a single cent. I saw my dad's smile falter. Then, I laid it all out. I told them how my dad had never believed in me, how he had looked down on me for wanting to cook, how he had written me off because I was not his idea of what a son should be. I told them how he had refused to support me, not because he could not afford it, but because he did not want me to be more successful than my brother. The room was silent. My father looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. My brother was shifting uncomfortably, eyes darting around, trying to gauge how people were reacting. Then, I smiled, raised my glass again, and said that despite all of that, I had still made it. I had still built something incredible. And, because they had come all this way to celebrate with me, I had decided to extend an olive branch. I turned to my brother, put a hand on his shoulder, and announced to the room that I had forgiven them both for everything that had happened. And as a gesture of goodwill, I was offering my brother a job at my restaurant. As a bartender. There was a pause. And then, the room erupted into applause. People cheered, clapped, and a few even whistled, thinking they had just witnessed a heartfelt family reconciliation. But my father and brother knew exactly what had just happened. I had put them in a position where they had to smile and act grateful, where they could not storm out in anger, where they had to play along. And I enjoyed every second of it. When the party finally wound down and people started leaving, my father and brother wasted no time pulling me aside outside the restaurant. My brother's face was red, his hands clenched into fists. They demanded an explanation. Said if I had no intention of making him a partner, I should have just told them from the start. I just laughed. Told them this was my way of paying them back. For every time they put me down. For every time they told me I was not good enough. For every time my father made it clear he never wanted me. This was exactly what they deserved. I turned around, got into my car, and drove off without looking back. That was a few days ago, and I have not heard from them since. My aunt thinks I might have gone too far, that I should have just kicked them out when they showed up. Maybe she is right. But I do not regret it. This was a long time coming. And for the first time in my life, I am the one holding all the cards. Update 2. I swear, my brother must be living in some kind of alternate reality. He actually had the nerve to text me, saying he would stop spreading lies about me and my restaurant, but only if I made him a partner. Let that sink in for a second. The same guy who has been running his mouth, trashing my name to anyone who will listen, thinks he is in a position to negotiate.
If he wants to be part of the business, maybe he should not be bad-mouthing it? That would be common sense.
But clearly, common sense is in short supply in my family.
It is obvious what is happening here.
This is not just him. This is my dad pulling the strings again, trying to set up his favorite son with a cushy job he did not earn. My dad is probably sitting there, coaching him on how to manipulate me into handing him a position of power, thinking I will just cave under pressure.
Well, they can keep dreaming.
I sent my brother a very simple message: if he does not stop running his mouth, he will be hearing from my lawyers. He has no leverage here, no bargaining power, and he needs to understand that. The only reason I have not taken action yet is because I do not want to waste my time on their nonsense. But if he keeps pushing, I will not hesitate to shut him down. He can take this as his final warning. For his own sake, I hope he listens.
Update 3.
It has been about a month since my last update, and honestly, I have been too busy running my business to even think about my dad and brother. But of course, they were not about to let things go that easily.
My brother did finally stop bad-mouthing me.
Probably realized I was serious about getting lawyers involved. But just because they were quiet for a while does not mean they were done scheming. Turns out, they were just working on a new plan, one that was even more ridiculous than the last. A couple of weeks ago, my dad and brother showed up at my house.
Unannounced.
I opened the door to find them standing there, looking all smug like they had already won whatever battle they thought they were fighting. I was tempted to just slam the door in their faces, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what nonsense they were about to spew this time.
And wow, did they not disappoint?
They told me they were planning to sue me for using my mother's name for my restaurant.
Yes, you read that right.
They actually stood there and tried to threaten me, saying they had already spoken to a lawyer and that if I did not want trouble, I needed to make my brother a partner immediately.
I could not even take them seriously.
First of all, no lawyer in their right mind would take on such a ridiculous case.
Second, she was my mother too.
Not just my dad's wife, not just my brother's mom, mine. And as far as I was concerned, there was no law in existence that could stop me from using her name. I stared at them for a moment, then just shook my head. Told them if they did not leave me alone, they would be forcing my hand, and that hand would be dialing the police. That is when my brother snapped. I guess all the humiliation had finally built up to a breaking point because he actually tried to grab me by the collar. For a second, I thought I was going to have to throw him out myself, but my dad yanked him back just in time.
It was almost funny.
The so-called golden child, the one my father had sacrificed everything for, standing there, red-faced and shaking, because I had done what he never could and succeeded on my own. I turned to my dad, ready to tell him one last time to get out of my life, but he held up a hand and told my brother to go wait in the car.
Said he wanted to talk to me alone. I almost laughed.
But I let him speak, just to see what his angle was. And of course, he went straight for the guilt trip. Told me that if my mother were still alive, she would be heartbroken over how I was treating my family. Said she would have wanted me to let go of the past and bury the hatchet.
I have never been angrier in my entire life.
This man, who had spent years treating me like a disappointment, who had refused to help me when I needed him most, who had only come crawling back when I became successful, he was trying to use my mother against me. I took a deep breath and told him exactly what I thought. I told him that if my mother were alive, she would be just as disgusted with him as I was. That she would have been ashamed of the way he had treated me. That every time he made me feel worthless, every time he chose my brother over me, she would have been heartbroken. He stood there, silent. He had nothing to say because he knew I was right. I told him to leave. For once, he actually listened. I watched as he walked back to the car, got in, and drove off. No yelling, no parting threats, just silence. And that was the moment I knew. This was over. They would never admit they were wrong. They would never apologize. They would never change. And I was fine with that. Because for the first time in my life, I was truly free. My restaurant is thriving, my team is incredible, and I have surrounded myself with people who actually care about me.
We are already talking about expanding, maybe even opening a second location. I do not need them. I never did.
And nothing they say or do will ever change that.